and what I want to just have you keep in mind is, as we talk about the Beatles today, the parallels between Monteverdi and Beethoven. They're not necessarily the first to do this or the first to do that, but they're among the early people to do some things. We're going to talk about some of those things today. But keep in mind, being first isn't always, it's worthy of being put on a pedestal. You did something first, you pioneered something. I'm not taking anything away from that. But I think what the real issue here is impact. That what the Beatles shared with Beethoven and Monteverdi was the ability to have impact through leadership, leading by example, and that others were so inspired and taken by these examples that they kind of became the paradigm. They didn't necessarily set out to do that, maybe with some intention to be pioneering. But what I think is interesting is to look at how what we're going to see with the developments, if you will, in music, the music of today, how markedly similar these are to the changes that Monteverdi and Beethoven brought in. Different changes, different things, different expansions, different growths, different things. But how these individuals were so impactful, not only upon general audiences, but other artists. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that when you inspire other artists to do things, and they modify what they do in process or in result, or and this is any kind of art, from choreography to sculpture, you're making an impression, and so that that part of your work becomes like a part of their work, and we sort of build upon that until another generation rejects it, and then we start over with a new set of principles and ideas. So along comes the Ed Sullivan Show. Ed Sullivan is probably remembered for 1,000 years because of what happened on his television program, which is such an epic event that we're not even going to take time to watch it because you all know what it is. And when the Beatles came and played on the Ed Sullivan Show, and how the audience reacted and how America reacted to that, and all of a sudden, overnight, the Beatles are as famous as the Queen of England. And what they do then from there on becomes just, every time they do something, it's history in the making, literally every time after that. It just becomes this obsession that really kind of continued through with even Princess Diana, the same kind of obsession with everything that they did. So Beatlemania comes about, and of course, Beatlemania. How do you really define Beatlemania? Fanaticism surrounding the Beatles in the 60s. Give some songs. Talks about the songwriting team. What is an example of Beatlemania? Please Please Me, She Loves You. That's a great example. And I Want to Hold Your Hand. Definitely were songs that epitomized those early years. And I think they're starting to realize, teenage girls, they rule the world. If they want to go stand there and just scream for 2 hours during a concert, you can't go do that in Carnegie Hall. It's changing things. So this now, the Beatles coming in, this is now moving things to a form of frenzy. When we come back to the idea of impact, one of the things that really made the Beatles the equivalent to Beethoven or Monteverdi would be impact. So we look at elevating. It's not taking anything away from the artistic integrity of any popular music ever. But there are a few specific things that the Beatles do that propel this next generation of artists, which really make them very important. And so to kind of review what's on that study guide, they're combining classical and popular elements together. Blackbird was an example that was given. We look at Eleanor Rigby, which is only 2 chords and maybe has some connection to blues, but is accompanied by a string quartet. So we have this direct combination of classical and popular elements. Eventually, they're going to abandon live performances, partly because of the Screaming Girls, but partly because this is the beginning of the development of what we're going to see with groups like Genesis and Yes in the 1970s, where audiences went to big concerts and sat and listened because the music was designed for, not for dancing, not for jumping up and down and screaming. It was designed, it was a more, we call it art rock or progressive rock. So those concerts, so the Beatles longed for that, but they weren't going to get it because of that Beatlemania and frenzy around them. So because of that, they were no longer bound by the idea that when you played live, you had to replicate what you had put on the record. They're now like, we're not going to play live anymore. So we're no longer bound by that. So what if we start adding other things? Because we're in the studio. This is integral to understanding the importance of the Beatles, because it changes the industry where now what you do in a recording studio, you don't have to worry maybe about replicating it on stage. Look at Steely Dan. Steely Dan didn't tour for the longest time. Alan Parsons' project too. They were completely concerned with creating a work of art that was bound to what you could do in a studio. So now we have the Fab Four, not only just playing their traditional instrument and singing along, they're going through and adding all kinds of other elements into the music because they're not bound by having to replicate this in live performance. It's a very, very huge thing.